Hi, today I'm going to be talking to you all about the Group 1 extended essay, which is in literature. So, Group 1 extended essay is English, language, or literature. Those are your topics that you can choose from. And so obviously the goal of this extended essay is to promote creativity and intellectual discovery, but more importantly, this is a chance for you to show your research and your writing skills. There are 3 specific categories for the Group 1 English Language Literature Extended Essay. So Category 1 is on literature. Category 2 is on a work in literature A compared to a translated work. And category 3 is language. I'm going to take some time being a little bit more specific about what we mean about these 3 categories. So category 1 literature is the basic form of the English EE. This is where you have studies of one or more literary works originally written in the language in which the essay is presented. So when I said category 1, literature A represents English. That is the language of the text that you're studying. So you will study an in-depth literary topic. You will engage in independent literary criticism. You will engage with established critical comment, and you will develop the ability to put forward your views in a persuasive and well-structured manner using appropriate register for the study of literature. That means appropriate words for literature. So you will be talking about like motif and theme and metaphor, etc. So when you think about category 1 literature, you're basically going to situate your analysis of your chosen text or texts in a wider context of the discipline. How does Khaled Hosseini's The Kite Runner fit in with some larger other aspect of literature? So this could look like a lot of things. It could include other literary texts, meaning you compare The Kite Runner to A Thousand Cranes, or not A Thousand Cranes, to another of Hosseini's works, like I'm like totally blanking on the name. Sorry, I said Thousand Cranes, but I meant to say you could compare The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini to another Hosseini work like A Thousand Splendid Suns, something like that. You could also include a particular critical perspective or insight. So you could take a literary text and apply like the feminist lens to it or a sociocultural lens. Whatever it is, your wider discussion needs to enhance the knowledge and understanding of your chosen text. You can't just summarize what your text is about, and you can't just report what other people say about your chosen text. So your research needs to be research, something that you do to situate your piece of literature or your text around a wider concept. Category 2 is a work in translation. So this is studies of a work or more than one work originally written in the language that you speak, so English, and then you have to compare it to one or more literary works originally written in another language. So maybe you would take, I don't know, Shakespeare's Macbeth and compare it to something that was written in Japanese or something that was originally written in German in order to make that comparison. A good example of an EE that did this in the past, they took a modern fairy tale and compared it to the original German translation of Grimm's fairy tales. So that was a good idea to see how the text itself, the language, changes meaning and understanding. So what do you actually study when you do works in translation, extended essay? You will study an in-depth literary topic, just like with category 1. You're going to engage in independent literary criticism, you're going to engage with established critical comment, and you're going to develop your ability to put forth your views in a persuasive, well-structured manner using appropriate tone. It's the same. It's the exact same as a category 1, except it is a purposeful comparison. You are picking 2 pieces of work that go together in a way that are easy to compare, and one has to be originally in English and the other has to be written in a different language. Again, you're going to have to situate this in a larger context of the work. Finally, there's category 3, and this is known as language in literature. So this is studies based in language based on one or more texts originally produced in your language, which is English, and then they have to be compared with a text in either another area, like or written in another language. So the comparative approach is taken, but one of the text types has to be non-literary or a multimodal essay. So what that means is, like, you can take an English text and you can compare it to perhaps graphic novel or comic strips, or maybe like advertisements. So the purpose of category 3 is to demonstrate your skills of textual analysis by considering more focusedly how language and culture or context influence the way in which meaning is constructed. So if you're looking at like maybe Maybelline ads throughout the 19th century, you are not only analyzing the text itself, the language that was used from the producers of those ads, like to manipulate people to, or persuade people to purchase Maybelline, but you're also going to be looking at the images. You need to examine critically the different relationships and interactions that exist between text and audiences. You're going to engage with critical writing, as appropriate, and you're going to again develop an ability to be persuasive and put forth correct terminology. In category 3, your terminology is going to be really specific, because it's going to either be terminology that has to deal with rhetoric, persuading people, or maybe you need to talk about the graphic art. So, or maybe you're using a film. A film can only be used in category 3. So you might need some film language in comparison to some literary aspect. So when you think about choosing topics for the English extended essay, for category 1 and 2, this is what you want to focus on. For category 1 particularly, you can choose one text or literary works originally written in English, or you can choose more than one. So I could do my whole study on Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, or I could compare the representation of the motif of illness in Persuasion and in Pride and Prejudice, okay? Like you can do one text or more than one text. For category 2, you need to have it has to be 2 texts, okay? And one of those works must be in English and one must be translated, but it could be multiple. You could compare 4 poems from an English author and then compare those to 4 poems from a Norwegian author or a Japanese author or whatever it may be. When you choose what you want to write about, it can be any genre. You can have fiction or nonfiction. You can have poetry, plays. You can have essays. You can have short stories. You can even have song lyrics, okay? You can choose, instead of focusing on genre, maybe you want to focus on a particular author. Maybe you want to do an author study of, someone's essays and short stories. When you choose your topic, you can look at it in a wider lens of philosophical movements, political movements, or social questions that maybe these literary works address. So maybe if we're sticking with Pride and Prejudice, maybe you would talk about Austen's representation of marriage, okay, and whether or not women have a right to make marriage an economical proposition. Maybe that would be your focus. No matter what, though, for both category 1 and 2, you have to choose texts that have literary merit, okay? Deciding whether or not a text has literary merit is pretty simple. Is it part of the canon? Is it stuff that teachers have taught for years and years? Literary merit, done. Has it won awards? Has it been published in multiple countries? If this is a singular romance text from an author that no one knows online, that's not going to have literary merit, okay? You can do a simple Wikipedia search to check out sources. Type in your text that you want to do, and when you type it in, see if other literary critics have written about it. It has literary merit, okay? See if it is referenced in anybody else's writing. It has literary merit. See if it's won awards or it's been presented. It has literary merit. If it does not, you cannot use that text. Category 3, when you choose a category 3 topic, you can do multiple things. You can do a single ad, like I was talking about Maybelline before. So you could talk about like a car ad, just this one car ad, or you can do multiple images. You can have more than one ad, like I said, multiple images, multiple ads, and these images can be with or without text. So category 3 doesn't have to have a written text with it. Okay, it could be a study of some print work in magazine or maybe some commercials. And so there's not a written text with it, but you have a transcript maybe of the commercial. You can also compare literary written text with text extracts. You can have media text. And so going back to that second one, literary written text and text extracts, which means like you could compare a book to its film adaptation. Okay. But it's still literary in nature. You are talking about the persuasive movements, not film language. You can have media text, such as advertising campaigns, films, radio, web pages, and blogs. You can have oral text, such as speeches and broadcasts. You can have literary text in conjunction with any of your media. How was a teleplay turned into the actual TV show? You can do any film analysis, but it has to be an analysis on language and literature, themes, and the language used to produce it, not camera shot types and things like that. That's a film paper. Ultimately, in this topic, you have to choose texts that have language or literary merit. So here are some examples of Category 1 topics that are effective versus ineffective. So maybe you like Shakespeare and you want to talk about how Shakespeare is really funny. You would not just have the broad topic of comedy in Shakespeare's plays. Okay, that's not effective. Rather, you would say the use of comic characters to explore serious issues in Shakespeare's Measure for a Measure and King Lear. Why is this one more focused? Well, first of all, we can't talk about all of Shakespeare plays in an essay. It's too much. You're not going to have a good paper. Second of all, comedy can be many things, so you need to zoom in on what you want to really focus on. Okay, comedic characters, great. Well, what about them? Always ask yourself, what am I focusing in on, and so what? What do I want to prove? All right, so I'm focusing in what? On comic characters. So what? I want to prove that actually Shakespeare uses comic characters to talk about really serious problems. All right, so that's why it's a really more effective way to do a Category 1. Look at the first topic, marriage in novels of George Eliot. Again, too broad. And what about marriage? So then when we just focus it to the portrayal of marriages as imperfect in Middlemarch by George Eliot, we've made a claim already. Oops, I went the wrong way. All right. For Category 2, remember this is one where you have to compare a work in translation to a work originally in English. So you can't just say, well, I just want to compare the main characters in Huckleberry Finn and Candide. That's why. Who cares? Rather, you have to have your so what. What are you trying to prove? Well, both Huckleberry Finn and Candide are satires, okay? So maybe it's a genre-based study. The importance of satires in the travels of the main characters in Huckleberry Finn and Candide, okay? Again, you're not just going to compare Shakespeare's sonnets, which are poetry, and then the poems about love of Pablo Neruda. If you look here on the other side, it's more focused if you say the treatment of the theme of love in a selection of Shakespeare's sonnets and specific poems by Pablo Neruda. All right, for Category 3, these topics can be all over the place, all right, because it's talking more about media and culture, how media and culture can use language and literature to get a message across, right? So the topics can range from so many things that interest you. Like you can start with the idea of successful political campaigns, or maybe you can look at the Argentine protest marches, or even like more recent Black Lives Matter marches in Baltimore, how we were kind of a big start of that. The influence of, you could look at how media shapes the view of female beauty. You could look at how cigarette companies have changed their advertising strategies. You can look at how perhaps there is humor in this essay that's trying to persuade people to do something for them. All right, but those are all very broad topics. So how would you make them more specific? So if you're interested in the Black Lives Matter marches, for example, you would say the use of different reporting methods by various newspapers to cover Black Lives Matter protests. I would probably even be more specific and say, how does Fox News versus CNN use different methods to portray or cover Black Lives Matter protests? All right, if you want to talk about successful political campaigns. It's an easy one. You would talk about the use of language and other persuasive techniques to confront the ideology of the United States by Malcolm X and maybe Martin Luther King. Or maybe to make it more frequent, you can talk about why or why not President Obama's speeches versus President Trump's speeches were unsuccessful via their use of language and persuasive techniques. So you're giving us that how. How are we analyzing this? Oh, through their language and persuasive techniques. What are we analyzing? The speeches of Obama and Trump. So what? Why does it matter? We want to talk about how it got them elected or how it confronted some war ideology or whatever it is. Always ask yourself, in whether it's category 1, 2, or 3, what, how, and so what. All right, so when you specifically then, you have an idea what this, the EE entails. Now I want you to think about the treatment of the topic. First of all, just because it's English and you love books and you love reading comics or whatever it is, you can't just read the book and get all of your sources, your evidence from the book alone. That is your primary source. Categories 1, 2, and 3, all English Group 1 essays must have secondary sources. So again, primary sources are going to be your literature or your language text that you're analyzing, whereas secondary sources are things like authors' other works, maybe to help you form your opinions, an author's biography, maybe info about the genre, like of satire or whatever, specific analysis of literary features that other people have done on the work, maybe academic journals or reviews. So if you are thinking of an essay in category 1 or 2, which those are the literary based ones, you want to consider how the texts work as literature. You want to deal with literary aspects like character, theme, motif, item, setting, items like that, audience, narration. And you want to figure out, well, how do they achieve a desired effect and what devices does the author use to do that? So that's one way you can treat a topic. So you could look at, for example, Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, and maybe you want to talk all about narration and whether or not Capote's narrative choices, like having an interpreted narrator, of having his narration told both in past and present time or whatever it is, maybe you're going to talk about how that creates a bias and we can't trust him as he's an untrustworthy narrator, whatever. That's one way to look at it. So a literary aspect, right? Another way to look at it is through a philosophical, political, or social issue. Maybe you want to talk about how Austen's Northanger Abbey is not really a representation of, Regency era values and why. You might want to look at it through literary criticism. Maybe a particular piece has gotten horrible literary reviews, like Twilight, for example, and you have found enough merit in it through other academic sources that you can prove the opposite. And then finally, maybe you want to analyze category 1 or 2 through the treatment of a literary biography. How does this text actually act as a representative of this author's moment in his life when he believed X, something like that. If you're working on a category 3, you want to, rather than that, you want to focus on how you can adopt an analytical critical position based off of language. So you really are going to focus on perhaps conflicting viewpoints on these images or the text and how they create a wider social context. So if, Nissan is trying to get you to buy their car and so is Toyota, what are they doing? How are they conflicting? Or talk about, for example, the social media tweets between Burger King and Wendy's. That shows conflicting viewpoints on who has the better burger and why. Well, you would not just be able to repeat all their tweets and then come to a conclusion, oh, Wendy's is better. Rather, you're going to talk about their language and maybe their use of images to present or persuade the audience to do something, or maybe their use of comedy. So your analysis in a category 3 has to be based on a wider context, how does it affect this place, this time, these people, this issue, this event? If you simply just interpret ads from a commercial or Wendy's tweets or whatever, but you don't actually consider who the original audience they were for, you're not going to get a good grade because things exist within the time that they were written. So an ad for smoking cigarettes, for smoking Camels in 1950 might have been effective then, and it might not be by showing like, maybe a woman's able to smoke while she vacuums. That might be effective then. It would not work today. So you have to put Category 3 essays, you have to situate them within the time that they originated in order to make any type of critical complaint or argument about them. So almost done here, just some important reminders. You are not allowed to write on any works that you studied during your IB years. So I mentioned the Kite Runner. Well, you study that junior year in English, you can't write about it. But can you write about 1,000 Splendid Suns? Sure, if you didn't read that sophomore year. Or Songs of the Sea, I think that's what his other books were called. A Sea Prayer. Could you write on Hosseini's Sea Prayer? Sure, absolutely. You also are not allowed to rehash any previous English essays or assignments from your coursework. All right, well, if you have any questions, you know where to find me.